Welcome to episode 16.
Hey, this is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to Who Did That Voice, where we take an in-depth look at voiceovers.
The holiday season is upon us, and there is no time like the present to book your holiday getaway with 3D Travel Company. Whether you want to set sail on the high seas or visit exotic and foreign locales, maybe your dream is to see a magical mouse, or maybe you long for a getaway that will universally appeal to all. For a limited time, my listeners receive a Disney gift card with qualifying Disney vacation purchases booked and traveled by the end of 2016. For more information on booking any of these trips, go to 3dtravelcompany.com and tell them Trenton sent you.
Welcome to Who Did That Voice, the show where we take an in-depth look at voiceover. And now, here's your host, Trenton Larkin.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the show. Today's special guest has done none other than the original voice of Michelangelo from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
There was this alien dude from Dimension X named Krang. Well, he was this war criminal who'd been banished to Earth and had his body taken away. So he was using Shredder to build him a new bot.
Our special guest also voiced Kennard from the Mighty Ducks animated series.
Oh, Kennard! Where have you been all these months?
I'm with what's left of the military, in the Resistance.
The Resistance? It really exists?
I'm organizing a team of our best special forces, and a few civilians we've had our eyes on. Like you. We're gonna take out Dragonis.
How? Nobody's ever seen him.
I found it, Wild Wing, in an ancient tomb in the mountains they call Twin Beaks. The Mask. Drake Duquesne's mask.
He also voiced the Tick, the superhero who cries, "Spoon!"
Arthur, what's the Tick really like?
The Tick? He's great. He's a little hard to work with sometimes, but he's stronger than anybody.
Listen, ours is an epic tale. True friendship, heart-stopping danger, men and women in tights, making the rules and breaking them. We are not 2 men, we are 10 men. Listen, it all started in Reno.
Another special character that our guest has done is none other than the voice of Jason Whittaker from Adventures in Odyssey. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Who Did That Voice? Today on the show we have Townsend Coleman joining us today. Townsend, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Trenton, it's my pleasure. Do you go by Trenton or Trent or T or what?
Mr. T. No, I'm just kidding.
This is a T.
I actually go by Trenton, but you know, if people call me Trent, I'm not gonna make a big thing about it. So,
well, I will call you Trenton.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yes, hi. Thanks for
doing?
having me over to play.
Thanks so much for coming over for a play date.
Yeah.
So, you know, the one thing we always like to do when we start out, Townsend, is just to kind of get a little background on the individuals that we're interviewing, just so people kind of have an idea of who you were as a boy growing up into the man that you became and kind of how you got into the voiceover industry.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, well, let me see if I can do this in a nutshell. I was born in Manhattan. My folks worked at NBC at 30 Rock in New York City, and that's where they met, got married in the early 50s, and I was born there, and a year later, my dad moved us all to Denver, where I lived until I was 7. Then we moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and that's where I really grew up and lived until I was 30. And at that point, made the big move out to L.A. I got into this business, I think, largely because my dad, when he was at NBC in the early 50s, he was head of the page department, what they call guest relations. He was the manager of the tour division there. But what he really wanted to do was be a network announcer for the network. It ended up not working out for him, and that's why we moved to Denver, where he got on the radio when I was a little kid. And I just remember growing up, with my dad being, really into voices and being a kind of a goofy kind of guy himself and doing silly voices, really sort of turned me onto it. And as I, got into my teen years, I was interested in acting but also radio, and went off to school at University of Colorado in Boulder in 1972, and was a theater. Well, actually, I was an architect major there that lasted about 2 minutes. And then I changed my major to theater, which is what I really wanted to do. But I only went to school for a year and a half, kind of got what I wanted to get out of it, went back to Cleveland, and through a fluky set of circumstances, ended up getting a job in radio in Cleveland in early 1975. And ended up working at 5 different radio stations over the course of the next almost 10 years in Cleveland, and was a DJ, and that's where I fell into voiceover work. I started doing commercials outside the radio station for advertising agencies in Cleveland, and I was doing a lot of local theater. I was modeling, if you can believe it. I was doing some TV work for one of the local TV stations. And by the time I turned 30, again, with another sort of fluky set of circumstances, I quit my radio career, was just going to freelance voice work in and around the Cleveland area. And then all of a sudden we found that we had to move out of this house that we'd been renting for a while. They were selling it, and we had to be out by the end of September of 1984. Well, this was in end of May of 84. I turned 30. Shortly after that, about 2 weeks after that, I quit the radio station that I was at. And about a month after that, into July or so, we found out that we had to move. So we had to get settled someplace pretty quickly because I had 3 kids at the time, and we had to get them settled in school someplace. So I thought, I've just turned 30. I'm no longer in radio. I've got to make a physical move anyway. Now's the time to either go to New York or LA, which is something that I'd always wanted to do. And due to the advice and encouragement of a couple of friends of mine from Cleveland, Will Ryan being one of them, Eugene, Adventures in Odyssey, amongst, billions of other characters that he's done. I came out here during the Olympics of 1984, found a place to rent, and 2 weeks later, we were living here. We moved in over Labor Day weekend of 1984, and I've been here ever since. So that's kind of how I got out here. And then just, I had a really good demo reel. I had put together a really strong demo reel for my voiceover work before I moved out here. And through a friend, got an interview over at a talent agency. I ended up with a commercial agent my second week here. I got very lucky. And started working pretty quickly, doing a little bit of voiceover work. But I didn't come out here to do voiceovers. I came out to do acting. I wanted to be on camera doing, film and TV and stuff. And figured I'd do a little voiceover to kind of make ends meet while I was trying to get that theatrical career off the ground. And about 6 months after I moved here in the spring of 85, I got an audition for a show called Inspector Gadget. Now, I'd never really given any thought to doing cartoons much, but I thought, well, that sounds fun. I went on the audition, had fun on the audition, ended up booking this show, and found myself in a little recording studio in Burbank with Maurice LaMarche, Frank Welker, and Don Adams, and me. And it was one of the most surreal moments of my career, of my life, really, when I sort of looked around and had to pinch myself and say, how in the world did I end up here? This is crazy. And when I started to realize, A, how much fun it was, and B, that there was actually a little dough to be made doing that, I asked my agent to, send me out on more of those kinds of things. And they did. And, I kind of one thing led to another, and I started booking some shows. And it kind of became my career. That, launched me in a whole different direction than I had planned. Voiceover ended up taking over. I ended up not even pursuing the theatrical stuff after a couple of years. And it's all I've done ever since. So there you have it. Are we done now? Thank you for calling, Trenton.
You're very
okay,
welcome.
We'll see you later. Nice chatting.
You can't go yet. I have more questions for you.
Oh, okay.
So
has more questions. Okay.
So as far as being on Inspector Gadget, what was it like working with Don Adams?
Oh my goodness, it was a blast. I mean, I was a big fan of his from Get Smart. I mean, as a kid growing up, watching him on Get Smart. So it was the first time I'd met him. Was that first day in the studio for me, and I was sitting right next to him. I was sitting between he and between him and Frank Welker, and then Maurice LaMarche, whose first show that was as well. It was not only my first series, but it was Mo's first series also. And he was sitting on the other side of Frank. And it was just weird. I don't know how else. It was surreal to look over to my right and just have Don Adams sitting there in the same kind of chair I was sitting in, at the same kind of mic stand and the same kind of copy stand. And, just doing the same thing I was doing. And, but one of the great things about Don, of course, was his sense of humor. And, obviously he was legendary for that. And he had such great stories to tell. Maurice, who was really a huge Don Adams fan and Get Smart fan, was always peppering him with all kinds of questions and asking him for anecdotes and stories and stuff. And he never failed to deliver. He was a very funny man and really crazy fun to work with.
Well, that is most excellent to hear. I mean, I know he always cracked me up, and I didn't put him together with his character in Inspector Gadget for a long time, but I was like, man, this voice is so familiar. And years later, as I grew up, I was like, oh, it's Don Adams.
Yeah. Well, and I remembered him from Tennessee Tuxedo, which was a cartoon that was, just like his character on Get Smart and was just like his character on Inspector Gadget. Don Adams pretty much just did Don Adams,
Yeah. Yeah. So what was it like working with Frank?
Wow. That was an education and an eye opener all in about, 30 seconds that day. Because I didn't, I watched cartoons as a kid, but I wasn't one of these people that grew up, wanting to be on them. I sort of never envisioned myself doing that. And B, I wasn't one of these folks that really wanted to know who did all the voices and stuff. So I didn't know who Frank was when I first moved to town. And so I didn't know his background. I didn't know his history. I didn't know his legend. But even more so, I didn't know that he was Dr. Claw on Inspector Gadget. Now, I was familiar with the series because I had 3 kids at the time, and when we were still in Ohio, they used to watch Inspector Gadget, and I would hear it on in the background, and I remember thinking that every time I heard that, I knew that Don Adams was Inspector Gadget. His voice was unmistakable, but I was always curious about who did the voice of Dr. Claw, because to me, it sounded like it must be a guy who was like 9 feet tall, like Lurch and just enormous, barrel-chested, kind of guy. And so never having done a cartoon episode before, when I was there in the studio that day, the way they do it is, they hand you your script and you go through your script. I was watching the other guys and sort of, following them, and they were going through the script and they were marking their lines, either highlighting them or circling them or whatever. And then we would do what they call a read-through, a pass, without recording it, although I think they would record it, but generally not use it. And it's kind of a rehearsal pass, and then we'd go through and record it. So we're sitting there, and I'd been introduced to the 3 of them, and, we chatted just very briefly, and then we got right into it. I was circling my lines, and I noticed that there was a Dr. Claw line coming up several pages in. And I just figured, looking around at these 3 guys, that the actor who did that voice wasn't there.
Yeah.
So that we'd probably just skip it and they would record him doing that later. So we're doing the read through and we get to that page that's got the Dr. Claw line on it. We come right up on it and I figure we're just about to skip it. And all of a sudden, Frank, who's sitting directly to my left, opens his mouth, and out of his face falls this enormous Dr. Claw voice, and I just about wet myself. And I slapped my hand over my mouth, and I said, "Oh my gosh, that's you!" I mean, I couldn't contain it because I was so stunned. And he stopped and he looked at me and he smiled. He said, "Yes, that's me." And I was like, holy cow, how do you do that? What is in there that you can make these noises? Because then I discovered moments later that he was also Brain the dog, and he was Mad Cat, and he was doing all these crazy animal noises and, doing incidental, bad guys and stuff. And I just got such an eye-opening education in those moments. Looking at him, I was flabbergasted. And so when we were on a break, I was just asking him about that and kind of his background. And he told me a little bit about, him being from Denver. And, I'd lived there when I was a little kid. But the crazy thing about Frank is he's so gentle. He's got such a gentle spirit about him and a really sort of light speaking voice naturally. He's a comedian, has done a lot of stand-up and a bunch of acting, but is probably best known for all the crazy animation that he's done over the years, and his specialty doing, sound effects and screams and animals and all kinds of stuff. And so he started, Mo said, do your 19 ducks singing at once, or 12 ducks or whatever it was. And so Frank did this crazy thing where it sounded like a bunch of ducks singing all simultaneously. And then Mo said, and do your Coke can. So Frank mimes this holding a Coke can and pulling up on the, aluminum pull tab, and it, breaks the seal, and does that whole, but he does all the sound effects for it as he mimes it. And then he pours it into a glass and you hear the glug glug, and then you hear the fizz and the bubbles, and then he drinks it. And I was just absolutely stunned watching him. I just thought this guy is somehow, otherworldly, superhuman in what he's doing, with his voice. That was pretty crazy.
That is a most excellent story. Thank you so much for sharing that, Townsend.
Yeah.
Well, so we've talked a little bit about your first role in voiceover. How did you end up becoming involved as Michelangelo in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Well, like everything else, pretty much everything else, the way we get work here in town is we audition for it, and our agents get the breakdown for what it is, and they pick their clients that they think are right for that audition or are right for that role, and they have them audition for it. And so I, was one of, I don't know how many guys ended up auditioning for Turtles, back in the beginning, but was lucky enough to get called back for all four Turtles, as did Rob and Cam. I think we all read for all four of them when we came back in for the callbacks. And that was that. What they do is they give you they show you a picture of the character, and then they give a little description of what the character is, a little description of what the show is, and then some sample lines that you read. And so I just went in, and auditioned for it, and then got a call back and did that, and waited a while, and then ended up getting a call from my agent that I had booked one of the roles on the show. At that point, they didn't know whether I was going to be Michelangelo or Leonardo. And same with Cam. They were undecided. They knew that they were going to use the two of us. They just hadn't decided which was going to be which. They knew Rob was going to be Raphael and Barry was Donatello, but the two, they would decide at our first recording session. So, I got that very much the same way I've, gotten, any of the other jobs that I get. Usually it's by auditioning. Now, every so often, I'll get a gig that they'll call me in that I didn't audition for, but they called me because they were familiar with my work on fill in the blank, so sometimes that happens, but usually it's just by auditioning through your agent. And so I went and I did that first session for Ninja Turtles, not knowing if I was going to be Michelangelo or Leonardo. And at the first session, on the first read through, the dialogue director, Stu Rosen, it was really just a coin toss practically. He said, Tony, why don't you just do Michelangelo this first pass? Cam, you do Leonardo, and then we'll do a second, read through, and we'll have you guys switch. Well, after the first read through, they were dealing with other things, and it seemed like this other issue was unimportant to them. So we just went into our second read through, and they didn't have a switch. They just said, just keep it the same way it is for now, and we'll worry about it later. So I was thinking that there was still a possibility that Cam and I might switch at some point, we just never did. And so I ended up being Michelangelo for 10 years.
Oh, it's definitely one of my favorite shows from when I was a kid, but I didn't even correlate that you were the voice of Michelangelo, because I grew up with you on Adventures in Odyssey, but I found that extremely fascinating to, kind of almost what my show name is, who did that voice? And I'm like, holy cow, it's Townsend Coleman.
Yeah, dude, that's more than fascinating. That's totally bodacious. Cowabunga! Whoa.
That's awesome.
Yeah, totally awesome, I guess would be another way of describing it.
Well, the Turtles have always been one of my favorite shows growing up, and I'm glad to know that you're a part of that.
Mine too, dude. Yeah, I grew up doing Turtles and stuff.
And eating pizza.
My anchovy and hot fudge pizza, my fave of all time. Oh, you got my mouth watering now, Trenton.
Well, we all know you're the party animal out of all the Turtles, right?
That's right, dude. Party!
Wow, that is a treasure. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I'll send you the bill.
Well, Townsend, what was it like working with the late and great James Avery, who played Shredder, or one of the voices of Shredder?
Well, it was awesome. You say one of the voices. Yes, he was one of the voices because, a number of folks, including myself, unfortunately, tried to fill in for him. But certainly after he passed away, even though that was long after we had done the series. But, James, he was just a gentle giant. He was just such a sweetheart of a man. Had this jolly laugh that just, shook to his core, and a terrific sense of humor, a terrific actor. My goodness, he was a classically trained Shakespearean actor. And, we're doing Ninja Turtles together for a couple of seasons when he got the role on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And then, was having to, be more busy with that. So people were filling in, kind of trying to emulate him as best they could. But working with him was a treasure, as it has been working with 99% of the folks that I've worked with in this business has been a treasure. They all have just such, I'm going to generalize here for a moment, but in this business, I've just discovered that these folks have such huge hearts, huge amounts of talent, are so quick and perceptive and just incredibly creative, and the acting that I see going on, what people would think of as behind the scenes, because we're not seen, but in a studio in front of a microphone, these people just dumbfound me. They really do. It's an incredible privilege and treat to be able to work with these folks, and to have worked with so many remarkably talented people, but remarkably priceless human beings. James being one of them. I remember the last time that I saw him, over at Kevin Eastman's house, we were doing some video recording for a documentary that was being made about the Ninja Turtles, and I just remember chatting with James at that point. He's just so dear and down to earth, and it was a great reunion. Seeing them all together. It was really the first time we'd all been together since we did the series, so I hadn't seen most of these guys in, quite a few years. And that was such a blessing that, that event, that day, to be able to catch up with these folks. Now, I'm getting the good fortune to hang with Rob Paulson and Cam Clark and Barry Gordon a little more often, because we're, doing quite a few Comic-Cons together now, largely because of the 30th anniversary of the Turtles 2 years ago. And, and so we're the four of us going out together and just having a blast. So that's great, and now that the Turtles has sort of been, reignited by Nickelodeon with the new 2012 series, and Brandon Auman and Ciro Nieli, have had us on, us being the original voices, on to do some crossover episodes, has been a huge amount of fun. And, just the fact that we're, now all these years later, still able to be even remotely relevant, as we get up there in age, we haven't fallen off the other edge of the table yet. We're still standing. So it's very cool. So anyway, that's sort of a roundabout way to say that, working with James was a terrific blast.
I'm glad to hear that, because he always struck me as such an energetic person and really friendly,
And he was.
And I'm glad that that's who he was, because he seemed like a really amazing guy. I wish I could have had the opportunity to meet him. So
very few of the people, and really honestly, none come to mind right off the top of my head, but the vast majority of people that you would have seen on camera, or maybe even, heard on a cartoon, heard just their voices, but you get a sense of kind of who they are. I really believe that sort of people's real, how can I say it? Kind of their real spirit, their real soul comes through in even in their voices, but especially if you see them on camera. Obviously there have been, actors throughout the years who have been a real disappointment. When you end up meeting them in person, they end up turning out to be, total jerks. But, honestly, I haven't worked with any. And, James was exactly like you would have expected him to be. If you're just sitting and talk to him, a big old, hilarious, jovial, friendly, love of a man. Same when I think of, for instance, in Adventures in Odyssey, which is a radio drama that I had, been doing for a little over 20 years for Focus on the Family. Alan Young, who I knew from Mr. Ed, and Janet Waldo, who I had known from, the Jetsons. She was Judy Jetson growing up. I got the privilege of working with both of them on Odyssey. And unfortunately, they both passed away a little earlier this year. Janet just recently. And people have asked me about them and about, what were they like? Were they, in real life, were they like what you'd think they'd be because they came across as being such kind, gentle souls? And absolutely they were. They were that and more. Sitting in the studio with both of them was like family. A good family, okay? Not a bad dysfunctional family, but I mean, a real loving, just full of life family. Both of them are just sweethearts.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us, because, those are two of my favorite actors as well. And it was really sad to hear that both Alan and Judy had passed. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Of course.
Well, I know another character that you played was Kennard on Mighty Ducks, which happens to be one of my absolute favorite series. I think they did an amazing job with that show, and I was sad that your character wasn't very long-lived on that show.
You mean like longer than one episode?
Yeah, I mean, they made it like a movie, so it was like the length of 2 episodes, but it was like very short-lived,
Yeah.
I'm like, why did
and that wasn't even an extra cost option. You got all that for the price of one.
But
yeah, well, I mean, that was fun. Again, a series that was fun to work on, but I only did one episode. It was the pilot episode, and So there's really not much I can speak to.
Yeah.
As far as that series goes, just because that's all I did on it. So
yeah.
I do. But I'm glad it was one of your favorite shows.
It was a really good show.
Perhaps you can tell me about it.
Well, it was just very energetic and action-packed. It was completely different from the live-action movies that Disney did.
Right.
It was just cool because they had puck blasters and spaceships that were duck lookalikes, and it was very unique and just a different flair of a cartoon. It was really fun. So
right.
Did you get to know Ian Ziering very well, or
no?
No, y'all probably not even work together.
Yeah, and in fact, I don't think I ever met him because I was just doing that one episode, and I really didn't even have that many lines. As I recall, and I've got a terrible memory, but as I recall, I just went in and recorded my lines wild, what they call wild, where you're not with any of the other actors. So you're not doing it in context with the other actors in the studio. So I just went in and wild lined my lines. And that was it. So I don't think I met anyone on the series.
I actually wondered that because of your role being as small as it was. I wondered if you would actually record it separately, because I know that does happen quite a bit in this industry. So
yeah, well, honestly, Trenton, they try in animation. They try. Well, I should say, in TV animation, not so much feature animation, but in TV animation, the production companies try and get all the actors together in the studio as an ensemble as much as they possibly can, because the energy is completely different when you have everybody together, as opposed to bringing in everyone separately and just having you read your lines wild. I mean, certainly you can get it done that way, and the actors are certainly proficient enough and clever enough and creative enough that they can they can make it sound as though they're all together. But my experience has always been that it really always does have a very different energy and feel when all the actors are together in the studio. Now that's for TV animation. For feature animation, well, first of all, feature animation is almost entirely done by celebrities. And getting these guys in the studio together and getting their schedules all ironed out and stuff like that is, from what I understand, is nearly impossible. So they end up wildlining, probably the vast majority of the feature animation stuff.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah. So if you ever get into feature animation, you want to do a voice in that, you'll probably be in a studio with just you and the recording engineer and the voice director.
Well, I know personally, if I got into voiceover work, I would rather work with a group, because I work better when I play off of other people. Because I've been in acting in high school and stuff, and doing it solo is okay, but it's way better when you're with a group of people.
Bingo. You see, that's exactly what it is. Exactly what I'm saying too. Yeah. And I think we all, feel that way. As far as, when you're dealing with celebrities, that's a little different animal. I've never done it. I've never directed them. So I am just sort of, I guess, speaking out of school a little bit here, only because this is just what I've heard and how I hear that it's done. But I've heard stories about how some celebrities can be difficult to deal with in the studio. Some celebrities don't want to work with other actors in the studio at the same time. Getting their schedules ironed out so that they can all be together at the same time is difficult. I mean, these are all things that I've heard, and I think that's fairly accurate. But I think that's a whole different animal than dealing with sort of the day-to-day journeyman voice actors, who do this for a living in mostly TV animation.
Absolutely, yeah, that totally makes sense. And those are some of the stories I've heard, that, movie stars are a tad bit more difficult to work with than TV voiceover artists, so.
Right.
Well, I know one of the other shows that you've been a part of was the first generation of Transformers, and I know you played a character Rewind on the show. Mm-hmm. And what was that experience like, working with those guys on that first generation series?
Well, I was pretty new in town back when I did that, and that was before I got Turtles. So I was back around the time I was doing probably Teen Wolf and Saber Rider and the Star Sheriffs, and some stuff for Hanna-Barbera Wildfire and shows like that. And it was just again, it was. I don't want to. I don't want to minimize it or downplay it by saying this, but it was just another job. It was another cool job. But it was, it was another character that I got to do. And Rewind, I think was, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't generally know about most of this stuff, but I think Rewind was only in a couple episodes. It was a pretty small character,
He was, yeah, but he was memorable because he was the tape cassette.
Right. Yeah. So. And I have people, telling me that all the time. And I suppose one of the cool things is just the fact that it was in Generation 1. It was, I got a chance to, even though it was a small role, kind of like Mighty Ducks, I can say I did Mighty Ducks. I was in Transformers Generation 1. Now the cool thing about that for me is that the flip side of that, back a number of years ago, I, for Cartoon Network, did Transformers Animated and did the voice of Sentinel Prime in that. For Transformers fans, and there are legions of them, some of the best conventions I've been to are over in England, a convention called Auto Assembly, and it's now called TF Nation. But in Birmingham, England, these Transformers fans are nuts, and they've had me over there a couple of times as a guest of honor, as they call it, and so being part of the Transformers universe has been very cool to have been on G1. And then also Transformers Animated as this jerk of a character, Sentinel Prime. So, yeah, it's cool to just, be part of these things that in their own way are, sort of iconic. You say you did Transformers and people's eyes light up. It's like saying you did Ninja Turtles and people's eyes light up. Or, you did... Whatever.
Well, you've been in a lot of cult classics or things that became cult classics. So, people definitely remember you because of that. It's kind of like Katie Lee was in Generation 1 of My Little Pony. It's when you're in Generation 1, it's huge, so.
Right. I was in Generation 1 of My Little Pony.
Were you really?
Yeah. I wasn't a pony, but I did a couple episodes of that. One episode, my character actually had to sing a song, which I don't do much of in animation, only because I'm not really a singer that much. I can sort of do cartoon singing a bit. And in fact, that Alice Through the Looking Glass that I did with Janet Waldo was the first time I worked with her back in the mid 80s. Will Ryan, Eugene from Adventures in Odyssey, who I knew from Cleveland. I knew Will in 1974. And in 1977, he drew a logo for me when I was doing morning drive at a disco station in Cleveland. And Will is one of the couple of guys who were responsible for my living out here. And so anyway, Will wrote all the music for this, Alice Through the Looking Glass. And I had to sing a couple of songs in that. And I think that was the first time I actually worked with Will before I worked with him on Adventures in Odyssey. But I don't do a lot of singing, as it were. Got to do some singing in Fraggle Rock. That was a lot of fun. But I sang in first generation of My Little Pony.
I did not know you were in the first generation My Little Pony. That's awesome.
Yeah, in fact, years later, really what my whole career has now steered into, really sort of starting in 1993, is I was doing a lot of animation and doing a lot of commercials and had a lot of commercial accounts that kept me busy. But I got a fluke audition to audition for a promo over at NBC. They were starting a new campaign called Must See TV. And I auditioned for this and ended up getting it. They liked the promo that I did on that audition, ended up putting it on the air that night. And I ended up being the comedy voice, in other words, voicing all their comedy promos for 16 years, from 1993 through 2009. And so network promo kind of became my career. I not only did the comedy promos, the primetime comedy promos, starting with, I think, Seinfeld and Blossom and all those things, all the way up through 30 Rock and Community and The Office. but also did the late night promos, did all the Tonight Show promos for Jay Leno for 16 years. Also Saturday Night Live and Late Night with Conan and Jimmy Fallon and all that stuff. So promo kind of became my career. It's what I still do now. I do I do promos for comedy promos for ABC for a couple of shows, Last Man Standing, Dr. Ken, Fresh Off the Boat, Real O'Neill's. But my daily gig, my daily bread and butter is I do the daily promos for what was Live with Kelly and Michael. Well, actually, I did it when it was Live with Regis and Kelly. And then Regis retired and Michael Strahan replaced him. And I was doing that for the last 4 years with him. And then now Michael Strahan is gone off to do Good Morning America. They're looking for another co-host at this point, and we'll find one probably, in a month or so. And so I do those promos for them every day, and that's kind of what keeps me busy. But it's the promo thing that has kind of become my career. So I don't do that much animation really anymore, or commercial work. I used to do a lot of the commercial stuff at accounts like Home Depot and Jenny Craig and Sunny Delight and Taco Bell and just 7-Up. I did the 7-Up dot for about 7-Up years, for strangely 7 years or so. And they made a bunch of spots every year, no pun intended, because the character's name was Spot. I don't know if you remember it, but the little red 7-Up dot, wore sunglasses and, ran around doing all sorts of crazy, hooting and hollering and stuff. That.
Yeah. I'm here.
Okay, me too.
My favorite commercial with the Spot was the Christmas one with the fire truck where they push it down, like they push it up the chimney and then down the roof. And I think that's what it is. Or maybe they push it off the roof into the chimney and it lands under the tree. And that was my favorite.
That's hilarious that you even remember those Spot commercials. Good for you, man. You get a gold star on your forehead today.
Dude, they were so memorable. I mean, I remember that and the Crisco cookie commercial when the cookies would rise, because they made commercials back in the day that stuck in your brain that were so memorable and funny and cute that like, how could you not remember that, And especially like the original Keebler Elf cookie commercials, which I know you were a part of as well. And those were super fascinating as a kid.
Yeah, well, one of the fun things about doing animation was it sort of opened the door for me to do animated characters in commercials too. So, I used to do a cereal called Rocky Road Cereal, did characters, and used to be, was Diggum the Frog for a while for whatever cereal that who was, I dig him. And then that character ended up being taken over by Frank Welker. So I didn't feel too bad about that. But doing characters like the Spot and oh gosh, I can't even think. I'm drawing a blank right now. I did this great spot I remember for Nestle chocolate chip cookie dough, and I got to do the voice of a cookie jar, a teddy bear cookie jar, who was lonely because he was always empty. Because the cookies were so good, they would eat them so fast, he would just end up being empty. So I got to do the voice of the cookie jar, but as well, I got to do the voice of the announcer on the end of it. And those are really some of my, favorite jobs to do is, some of that sort of iconic stuff for the, big national brands like, like Sunny Delight and Nestle and, Colgate toothpaste and Friskies cat food, just stuff like that, being the voice of Home Depot for 7 or 8 years was pretty special, pretty amazing.
I bet it was most fascinating for you. I mean, and that's what this whole show is about, to show people that voiceover is more than just animation, and that there's there's so many amazing jobs, that can be out there for voiceover, but people just don't always know that. And that's why I wanted to create a show where people could realize there was so much more depth to what voiceover is.
Right. Well, like you, as we were chatting earlier, I mean, when I was a kid, and I'd listen to the radio, I don't know why I think one of the reasons I became fascinated with with the radio more so than being an on-camera actor, even though that's ultimately what I ended up wanting to be. But there was something really fascinating to me about listening to the radio and listening to these DJs, because you couldn't see them, so you had to use your imagination and what you thought they looked like. And they never ended up looking like what you thought they did, But I remember when I was in high school, I was I was probably a junior in high school, and I went down to one of the big top 40 radio stations in Cleveland, got permission to go down there with a camera at the time, and record the DJ while he was on the air, and seeing him through the glass. And when he'd turn on the mic and do his breaks, and I instantly recognized the voice, but he didn't look at all like what I thought he looked like. And, he was just this goofball behind the mic. And then he, hit the record, and the song would start, and boom, he was off onto another thing. And I was absolutely starstruck. It's like, so when I got into radio, it was a real fantasy for me for a while, until I realized, that there was kind of no future in it. It was novel for a while, but there's no money in it and really no future. And so, that's why I ended up wanting to get out. But it really lit my fire for doing the voiceover thing. And I remember when I was on the radio, I used to love hearing these voices that would come in, because I was a production director at the couple of radio stations I worked at. We would get these tapes in of national commercials, like for Ford or I'm drawing a blank, but you name it, a product that would come in. And, oftentimes these commercials were being done in Chicago or New York or LA. And we get these spots in from LA. And I remember hearing, these spots for Anheuser-Busch. And it was for, and just loving this guy's voice, and found out that it was a guy named Danny Dark. Well, Danny was also the voice of Chevy, and ended up being the voice of NBC shortly before I was over there. And I just loved this guy's voice. And so I was just so into listening to voices and wanting to know who these guys were. And I remember after I moved to LA and I got that first gig doing a Keebler Elf, it was such a trip being able to do a Keebler Elf, something that to me was iconic because I'd watched these things for years. And meeting Parley Bear, who was, the voice of Ernie the elf, the sort of little head elf, and hearing him talk was like, oh my God, that's Ernie the elf. and so getting to act with him and, be one of his, little elflings was great fun. But the thing that really got me was I knew that Danny Dark was the announcer on the end of these commercials, these Keebler commercials. And I had never met Danny. I was only in town maybe a year or so at that point. But he was legendary to me. And I was hoping that we would meet him at the session. Well, he wasn't at the session. So we were signing, after we did our bit and we were signing our paperwork and stuff, just getting ready to go. The door of the studio opens and there's Danny Dark. He comes in and I recognized him because I'd seen pictures of him, but I'd never met him. And I'll tell you, I was as starstruck gets. I'm usually not that starstruck, meeting, celebrity types, but guys like that who were just heroes of mine and legendary. I remember meeting him and I just introduced myself to him and just said, I am a huge fan of your work. And it's like when I met Dick Orkin, for the first time, who, had been Chicken Man and with Dick and Bert, a production company that he had done so many famous commercials and had such a distinct style. When I met him and actually worked for him the first time, again, I was just starstruck, meeting this legend in our business. I love it. I just, so hats off to you and this podcast, because it's one of the coolest businesses out there, and one that, so many people are, completely unaware of, and rightly so. But I will say that, it's becoming much more of a thing now, so I find that more and more people are not only aware of what voiceovers are, but want to do voiceovers. And, more and more, it seems like, people are able to start doing it from their homes, much like you and I are talking right now, because where are you located? You're in Texas somewhere?
I'm a Texas boy, but I'm actually living in Oklahoma right now.
Okay. Well, here I am in Glendale, California, and we're talking like we're sitting right next to each other.
And it's wonderful.
And with technology, what it is these days, a lot of people who are interested in voiceover and are, getting a hold of these voiceover websites, some of which are rather unsavory, but that's true in any business, are trying to get, voiceover work, and more power to them. I'd like to see the voiceover industry, remain a union-based industry, because I think that's my little soapbox here, because I think that's where the clients ultimately end up getting their best talent and the best result. But hey, it's a big old free market out there, and
absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Townsend, the other thing that I would love to ask you about is how you became involved with Adventures in Odyssey. I know it's an extremely long time running radio drama. In fact, I believe it is the longest running radio drama of its kind. And what was it like for you to become part of that show?
Well, I was a big fan of Focus on the Family before I even heard of the show. When I lived back in Ohio, I just appreciated what the ministry did and what the ministry does. And so when I came out here and met Katie Lee, we were working on a show called the Glow Friends. The first special we did was called Glow Friends Save Christmas, and then we did the series called the Glow Friends. And we both worked on that. And that's, I think, if I recall correctly, where I met Katie, and we kind of hit it off, and became buds. And so I remember when she and Will Ryan were working on Adventures in Odyssey, along with Hal Smith, who was the voice of Wit. And Hal passed away. And so Focus decided that they weren't going to try and replace him. Rather, they were going to create two new characters to sort of replace the one character. And those characters were Jack Allen, played by Alan Young, and Jason Whittaker, Wit's son, which is the role I do. And so I because I knew Katie, gave him a heads up about me, and I got an audition with them, and went and met with them, and ended up getting the part, getting the role. And so that was a very cool thing, something that I liked the work, because they do such great work. Quality wise, it's one of the top-notch radio dramas to listen to. The production department over there, Focus, is unreal. These guys are so on top of their game. And I really appreciated the show itself for the message that it gave, and for what it was really essentially trying to, teach young people. I appreciated that personally. So I liked being a part of it for that reason as well. Not too long after Alan and I started in on the show, they found a gentleman named Paul Hurlinger up in the Pacific Northwest, who somebody tipped him off to, and sounded remarkably like Hal Smith as Wit. And they ended up hiring Paul, and Paul became Wit. And so they brought Wit back into the series. And we all sort of, lived happily ever after until, unfortunately, Paul passed away a couple of years ago. And they replaced him now with Andre Stoica. Again, another great VO compadre who I've known for many, many years, and is a very successful, commercial voice actor in his own right, and audiobook narrator and such. But so Andre is now Wit. And that's how I got involved in the series, and have worked with some just amazing people, Phil Lawler and Paul McCusker and Nathan Hubler, and so many great writers and audio guys over the years, and other actors, getting to work with Corey Burton and Jess Harnell, and Walker Edmiston, and oh my gosh, the list is just so long. These wonderful people to be able to work on this series with for so long is just a really true treat,
Absolutely. Well, in closing, I do have one final question for you, Townsend. Mm-hmm. It's just, what is the legacy you want to leave behind?
Oh, goodness. Legacy. That's sort of a big thing, ain't it? I think Trenton, just real simply, what I'd like to leave behind as I hope that I've done with my kids, they're all grown and moved out now, have families of their own, but as I hope that I've left with them and have left with the people that I've worked with over the years. I really want to leave behind a real genuine kindness, a real genuine human being. I would hate to think that, people thought of me as shallow or phony or, I'm a bit of an introvert and, I don't speak out often. But the people who know me, I think, know me to be a man who loves and cares and is hopefully full of compassion. So as far as a legacy goes, this sounds terrible. It's like I'm writing my own eulogy or something. But I would just like to think that people, thought of me as a genuinely kind, generous, giving human being who cared about others, regardless of their shape, size, or color. I love people deeply, and I'd sort of like to leave it that way.
Well, I think that's a most excellent word. Showing selflessness and the desire to care for others over yourself is, I think, the one thing that everyone should strive for. So
Amen.
I admire you for that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Well, thank you, dude. I really appreciate that. And I agree with you. To me, that's the most, I think it's the most important thing. We all make mistakes in life, but, if we can, pick up after them and make good on them and just continue to, put others, before ourselves and not think of ourselves more highly than another. I just think that that's the most important thing.
And I absolutely agree with you 100%, Townsend. Well, Townsend, it has been an absolute honor and pleasure having you on the show today. Would you just give us a closeout today as Michelangelo from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Totally, dude.
All right, dudes and dudettes, Michelangelo here from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, just kicking it in the old turtle lair down here in the sewer with my good bud Trenton Larkin and his awesome show, Who Did That Voice? I would guess that would be me, wouldn't it? All right, dudes. Hey, thanks for having me over to play, dude. I gotta go battle the evil Shredder now. See you later. This has been totally bodacious. Cowabunga!
Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's Turtle-rific episode with Townsend Coleman, the original voice of Michelangelo from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And if you did, please stop on by my Contact Me page at whodidthatvoice.co. I'd love to hear from you. Hey you guys, this week's special giveaway is from Buck over at New World Comics. He's the owner over there. They are located at 6219 North Meridian Avenue, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, 73112. If you get a chance to go inside and see Buck and his crew, tell him Trenton sent you. Well everyone, that's all the time we have for this episode. Join us next Friday for our next special guest, Barry Gordon. He voiced the original Donatello and Bebop from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He was Razor on SWAT Cats and the Nesquik Bunny. We'll see you next week. Hey, are you ready to win some awesome prizes? All you have to do is like our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter for your chance to be instantly and automatically entered for your chance to win.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time for more discoveries on Who Did That Voice.